Hello again. Let's see what type of references we're going to be looking for. Again, we have to be careful with the capacity of our PC, and that means with our RAM. So for example, this would be a very good reference for us to use if we have around 8 GB of RAM installed on our PC. So if we look closely, this is basically just a box with a rectangle for the first floor. So let's say that we're going to be modeling this type of architecture. First of all, we already know how to create this type of slopes, and also how to exclude certain areas for our grass scattering. So let me just show what we're going to be modeling. So in here, we're basically going to model obviously our architecture and the first foreground elements, which include the road and maybe this bit over here. But the rest of our image, we're obviously not going to be modeling all of the background. So we would be using a photograph and just follow the same process that we did for our interior design. However, in this case, we would not be placing the photo on our refractions. So let's go into 3ds Max. Here, inside our render setup, we have the overrides. So if you remember correctly, we use the refraction override in order to place a background. But for exterior visuals, it's a little bit different. We would use the direct visibility override because we're no longer working with interior glass. That's the only difference between these two when using a background. Now let's go back to our references. Alright, so this should be pretty easy for you to model now, and also make sure to determine which type of perspective we're using. In this case, for instance, it's just one vanishing point. And we would be using the same method as we use for our interiors to place our camera. Now again, if you don't have a very powerful PC, it's better for you to start with something like this. Now for our next reference, we have this house. Now we could pull off this type of design with 12 GB of RAM, but be careful because we do have quite some interior furniture inside here. So that's going to be the heaviest part of this because the glass and all of the structures for the exterior would be the least of our problems, as this will not add up so many polygons to our scene. We could just leave out the interior furniture because we do have some reflections going on our windows, which distracts us from what's really inside of our architecture. However, having some furniture inside does add up to our details, and details are very important as it's going to let us reach a little bit more of realism. Okay, so again, this would be around 12 GB of RAM to pull this off. Okay, next up we have this kind of design, and this one has lots of details on it, including the buildings at the background. You might not find a background photograph that matches the context, so we would need to create the buildings from scratch. And also you can see how much detail there is on this facade, which will add up many polygons to our scene. Also, we have many elements of vegetation here that will make our scene a bit heavy. So 16 GB of RAM can pull this off. I wouldn't recommend trying something like this if we don't have 16 GB or more of RAM. Alright, so this is a very good example that we can use as a reference image because it has many simple details. It's not that big in scale. We see so much contrast between the vegetation and the light from the sun. So taking something like this, it's really going to be helpful for us to understand how lighting works for our exteriors and also to practice our modeling. So you can see the details that this one has. For example, the structure from the ceiling, a little bit of furniture. Also, this is done with a floor generator and so on. So this is a very good example. Again, it has really good lighting. The design is perfect to practice our modeling skills, and also the texture from it, it's not really that common. So we would learn a lot out of this example. Now, I'm not saying to go for this one specifically because the point of this is for everyone to end up with their very own portfolio. You can also try and go for a winter scene, but as we saw on our last lecture, creating snow will require a lot of polygons creation. However, if you want to go for it, then go for it, and we will be there for you if you need us. In this particular scene, you can see that there's not much going on except for the snow, so 12 GB of RAM should be enough to get you through this design. Now, if you have 24 GB or more, you have no limits, so go for anything you want. If you want to go for a building, do so, but I would highly suggest to start with small architectures that doesn't have that many details, because again, we have to practice first. We cannot jump certain steps that we have to take in order to get better and better. Alright, so this is it for this lecture. Thank you everyone. I'll see you in the next one.